Hello. So we move now to our final unit, or our final module, in which we'll discuss broadly existentialist questions about, for example, the absurdity of life, the meaning of life, whether life has any meaning at all, and so on. We begin with a really great paper by Thomas Nagel called The Absurd, and then excerpts from Albert Camus' The Myth of Sisyphus. I'm also going to talk a little bit about Hamlet, I think, so hopefully you got at least some of the plot of Hamlet from Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are Dead, provided you didn't already know it. So without further ado, let's just jump right into the Nagel paper. So he begins with an observation that many, if not all of us, have at least occasionally thought that life is absurd. Something terrible happens, something hilarious happens, something unexpected happens. We're just like, man, life is what even is this? This is wild. But Nagel goes on to point out that our reasons for saying that life is absurd usually aren't particularly good. Nevertheless, they seem to get at something, and we'll say more on what later. So some examples of why we might think life is absurd. And these are some arguments people give, and Nagel has some nice responses to them. So one thing you might say is, well, life is absurd because nothing that is the case now, so nothing that's true now, will matter in a million years. And Nagel says, yeah, but so what? If that's true, then nothing that is the case in a million years should matter now. In particular, it doesn't matter that in a million years it will be the case that nothing that was the case a million years ago mattered. It's a little tricky to say, but hopefully you get it. We can only say anything about what matters now or in a million years if the thing matters full stop. The thing matters, period. It matters in and of itself. And if we can't know whether it matters full stop, we certainly can't know whether it matters full stop, whether it'll matter full stop in a million years. So the idea here, and again, it's a very fun paper to read, but the idea is just that you might say it won't matter in a million years, but if that's true, then all these other things are true too. In particular, it's true that what will matter in a million years shouldn't matter now. You might also say, well, look, we're just specks in an inconceivably vast universe. And Nagel says, but so what? Would life be any less absurd if we were quite large and the universe was quite small? Seems like not, right? You might also say, well, life's absurd because we're going to die someday. And Nagel says again, but so what? Life isn't just a long chain of events wherein the previous event justifies the next event, which in turn justifies the next one, and so on and so forth, right up until the final curtain falls. Justifications for things start and end within life all the time. So I might have a small chain of events in my life that one justifies the other, then it ends, and then another one, and then another one, and that's fine. That doesn't make life less absurd, right? We're going to die someday, so what? Doesn't make life any less absurd. So the question we have to ask ourselves is, what is absurdity? Now, at first glance, the absurd is what arises when there's a conspicuous clash, again, a tension, as we've talked about, between our pretensions or ambitions on the one hand, and reality on the other. So, for example, here's some absurd situations that seem to arise because of this clash, or this tension. Giving a rousing speech in favor of an issue that's already been decided. Having your pants fall down while being knighted by the queen. Presumably all of the events in the Alanis Morissette song Ironic are examples of absurdities rather than ironies. If you don't know that song, you should give it a listen. It's a classic. I had it on cassette in 1995. Now, usually, we try to get ourselves out of these sorts of absurd situations, or we can at least imagine getting ourselves out of these absurd sorts of situations. And these are sort of garden variety absurdities, Nagel says. If there's an absurd in the philosophical sense, right? If there's something out there, namely the absurd, right? Then it must arise from the perception of something more universal, right? Less sort of context dependent than the knighting faux pas or giving a rousing speech about an issue that's already been decided. It should be something more universal. That is, some respect in which pretension and reality clash for us all in every situation. It should be the kind of absurdity that one cannot escape, says Nagel, without escaping life itself. And Nagel thinks that we have such a thing. He thinks that such a thing is on offer. In particular, he wants to say that the clash or the tension is between the seriousness with which we take ourselves and our lives, and the perpetual possibility of regarding everything about which we are serious as arbitrary or open to doubt. So let's say that again. It's the tension between how seriously we take our lives on the one hand, and on the other, this like constant possibility that we can regard everything about which we're serious as just arbitrary or open to doubt. So we've got a notion of what universal absurdity might be, and we're going to unpack this more as we go on. But why should we believe such a thing? Well, in order to establish that we should believe such a thing, we need to show a couple things. We need to show first that we do in fact take ourselves seriously. And second, that we're able to regard all of these things, right, these reasons for which we take ourselves seriously, as arbitrary or open to doubt. And Nagel gives us what I think are some very convincing arguments about why this is the case. So, regarding number one, why we take ourselves seriously, it's just obvious that we do. It's just obvious that we do. I think you can't really say, well, no, we don't. Look, we really care about ourselves and our friends and our families and our careers and our sex lives and our finances and our health. We care about so very many things. As Nagel puts the point, I think quite beautifully, leading a human life is a full-time occupation to which everyone devotes decades of intense concern. That we take ourselves seriously isn't up for any serious debate. So regarding number two, this notion that the reasons for which we take ourselves seriously are open to this perpetual possibility of just being shown to be arbitrary or subject to doubt. Nagel argues that even though we're quite concerned with our lives, even though we're quite concerned with our individual lives, right? We're sort of very concerned with what's immediately around us and immediately happening. We have this unique ability to take a step back and look at life from the perspective of the universe. I'm going to butcher this Latin pronunciation, but it's subspecie aeternitatis. So from the perspective of the universe, or from the perspective of infinity, we can take this step back and sort of look down at life, at our lives in particular, and what it is we're doing. And he argues further that in taking this step back, we're able to see that all of the systems of justification and criticism upon which we base our decisions is never really called into any real question. So we never sort of step back and go, yes, I see that these are the reasons I do the things I do, but what justifies those reasons? What sort of provides support for my doing things in the way that I do them, beyond sort of the fact that that's how we've always done them or something like that? So all of these sort of systems of justification and criticism upon which we base our decisions is never really called into question. And even if we did call it into question, even if we did take this step back from the perspective of the universe and go, oh, well, geez, I act in these sorts of ways because of these sorts of things, and I want to know more about these sorts of things. Well, how do you do that? How do you interrogate those things? It seems like in trying to justify those things, we're going to wind up sort of presupposing the justifications of those things, right? Because if all of our sources of justification and criticism are this, and we're trying to justify or criticize this, what are we going to bring to bear in our justification or criticism of the very thing? It seems like we can't do this without circularity. We take it as a given that certain things are the case. But from the God's eye view, right, from the perspective of the universe, it's not at all obvious that we're justified in taking these things for granted. But that doesn't stop us going on as we were. So it's the ability to take this step back from which the absurdity arises. So on the one hand, we have we're very serious about our lives. On the other hand, when we take a step back and we view it from the perspective of the universe, we see that all the reasons for which we take our lives so seriously are only justifiable via circular method. And it's not really clear like how we're supposed to give warrant to the things that give our lives meaning. And I really love this bit about the mouse in the paper. I think it beautifully illustrates the point, right? We're like, like, well, look at the mouse. He's just sort of going around. He gets cheese. He mates. He runs around. He does mouse things. Like, his life isn't absurd. But, well, give that mouse the ability to take a step back, to take a step out of his little mouse life, and you will see an absurd mouse life for just the reasons that we've said. And so going on, he says, like, from this absurdity, there is no escape. This is it. Like, this is how life is. This is how the world is. So what do we do? What do we do about this problem, if it is a problem? So Camus, who we've read an excerpt of, and I recommend reading the whole novella if you have the time. I mean, Camus is quite a good writer. If you read French, all the better. But the English is quite nice. So Camus thinks that even though we can't escape the absurdity, we can at least retain some dignity through scorn and defiance, as Sisyphus does. Right? So Sisyphus is this king who sort of defied the gods, and as punishment for his defiance, he is made to roll a very large hill above a very large boulder up a hill, only for the boulder to then fall back down to the place he started, and he walks down the hill and he does it all again. And this is his life forever. We're going to talk more about Sisyphus when we talk about the Richard Wolff piece next time, and a bit when we talk about Susan Wolf's piece too. Richard Taylor, Susan Wolf. So we have the Sisyphus story, and Camus thinks that in the sort of the little walk down the hill, when Sisyphus sort of hasn't gotten back to the boulder yet, and he's not laboring to get it up the hill, in that moment he can just sort of be like, "You bastards, I hate what you've done to me," and you can have this sort of wry scorn, and he thinks that's how we can escape the absurdity. But as Nagel points out, we can only really escape the absurdity by suicide. Right? The only way to get out of the absurdity of life is to get out of life, because it's sort of hardwired into life. But he says, and I will reiterate, let's not be hasty before we're like, well, that's the solution. I guess we're out of here. We should think hard about whether or not this is a problem. Right? So if the problem of the absurdity of life isn't a capital P problem, then it seems like it's not the sort of thing that we should approach either with scorn, as Camus suggests, or by killing ourselves, as someone like Hamlet might suggest. Right? There's the real Hamlet concern, right? In his soliloquy, he's very much on this worry about the absurdity. Who would suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune? Who would bear the, all the evils that flesh is heir to, when with a bare bodkin he could end his woe? Who wouldn't do that, but for these other reasons? So, like, he's worried about the afterlife. Nagel, not so much, but I think Hamlet arrives at, like, look, that's not a problem in the sense that we think. Life is absurd, Hamlet points it out. He thinks about taking the way out that Nagel suggests is the real way out, but then he opts for some other course of action. And that's what Nagel thinks that we should do too. He thinks that we should not view this problem as a capital P problem, right? He says it's not a problem. It's a bit of what makes us human, right? It's sort of what it is to be a person. What else? What else on this earth, or in the universe so far as we know, has this wild ability to take a step back and look at from the perspective of the universe at sort of what's going on? That's sort of what makes us us. And that's kind of nice. That's a nice way, I think, to think about it. And so Nagel says, given this, like, we shouldn't resent the absurdity, like Camus suggests. We shouldn't try to escape it. if from the perspective of the universe, sort of nothing matters, then it doesn't matter that it doesn't matter, right? We can approach the absurdity of life with irony, right, rather than with heroism or despair. So I think it's a fun paper. I really liked this, and it makes this nice point about philosophy that, like, in philosophy, there are some kinds of problems that, when you get right down to it, seem insoluble, right? There's no real solution to the absurd, right? There's a tension here, and it seems like there's just no way of resolving it. You can be scornful, but that's not a resolution. You can kill yourself, but that's not really a resolution in any kind of way that we would like. Remember, when we think about resolving problems and resolving tensions, we're asking ourselves if we're doing so in a way that's tenable. It seems like that's not tenable. Or we can just sort of be like, yeah, it is what it is. Who wants to get pizza? And this reminds me of my favorite quote from David Hume, which is footnoted in this Nagel piece. So a little background on David Hume. He was a Scottish philosopher in the 18th century, and he dealt some serious blows to philosophy for which it still hasn't fully recovered, and probably never will. He kind of fundamentally changed the game. And if you'd like to know more about Hume, let me know. I'm always happy to talk about Hume. He's one of my favorite philosophers. But he sort of revealed some of these problems about induction and causation, and aesthetics, these tensions that seem to have no obvious resolution. And when you read the Inquiry Concerning Human Understanding, or some of his other works, he's very bombastic, and he's very taken by these problems. But he says this wonderful thing, and I'll read it to you now. He says, "Most fortunately it happens that since reason is incapable of dispelling these clouds, nature herself suffices to that purpose and cures me of this philosophical melancholy and delirium. Either by relaxing this bent of mind, or by some avocation and lively impression of my senses, which I obliterate all these chimeras. I dine, I play games of backgammon, I converse, and am merry with my friends. And when, after 3 or 4 hours' amusement, I would return to these speculations, they appear so cold and strained and ridiculous that I cannot find it in my heart to enter into them any further." So what's he saying here? He's saying, yeah, these are problems. And when I'm thinking hard about the problems, man, it really bums me out. It makes me wonder, oh God, what do I do? So what do? I shut the laptop, I shut the book, I go get some supper, I have a couple of beers with my buddies, I play some cards, I play some backgammon, I shoot some pool, I have a good time. And I do that for a bit. And then when I come back and open the laptop or open the book, and I look at these problems like the absurd, they just seem to me so irrelevant, so strained, and so cold that, like, what's even the point? This is not to say that philosophy has no point, but it's to say that sometimes you come upon these questions and they seem like the biggest problem in the world. But again, take that step back. Go live life a little bit, absurdity and all. And when you come back to sort of think about the absurd, you won't think as Camus does or as Hamlet does, right? You will think, as Nagel suggests we should, that, like, this is kind of hilarious. Who wants to get a beer? So that's sort of the paper. That's kind of the view. It's a really cool paper. I look forward to talking about this in the discussions. Let's talk about Office Space a bit. Again, this is a late '90s movie. Mike Judge, guy who did Beavis and Butthead, he did King of the Hill. He did Idiocracy, which is another real good movie. He wrote and directed Silicon Valley, the HBO show. I really like Mike Judge quite a bit. I like this movie quite a lot. I take it that the characters in the film are in a very sort of absurd situation, right? They're in a very Sisyphus-like situation. And I think they take a very Camus-style approach to the absurd situations in which they find themselves. Certainly there's enough scorn and defiance to go around in the film. Now, on the other hand, you might think that Peter, the main character, post-hypnosis, but before his friends get fired, embodies the sort of Hegelian response to the absurdity of life, especially his life, right? That is, he sort of just bounces through it, man. Like, hey, what are you gonna do? These reports are silly, yada yada yada. I don't really care for this. I don't think I want to go to work anymore. He just kind of vibes his way on through, and maybe that's the thing to do. I look forward to again chatting more about this on the discussion board. Okay, so that's going to do it for us today. Thanks for having a look at this. I hope you enjoyed the papers. I hope you enjoyed the film. Next week, we're going to talk about Richard Taylor. Next time, we're going to talk about Richard Taylor's paper, The Meaning of Human Existence. I think it's quite a good paper. So it's long, but it reads pretty easy. So I hope you all enjoy it, and I will see you in the next video.